Hi, everybody. We're going to begin. Good evening. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Meaningful Jewish Living, class number 2 in the series of Jewish life cycles. Once again, this is not designed, nor will we be able to cover everything about Jewish life cycles tonight. However,
your call will be connected when you enter the PIN followed by the pound key.
Hello, pound key, please mute yourself. I like to give people the opportunity to unmute. But if I
Thank you. You have joined the call, but you are the only one.
Okay, I have controls, beware. And I want everyone to know something really fascinating about the controls. Do you know, and would you like to experience, I can also turn your cameras on. Do you want to see that? I'm not going to do that to anybody because I know that could be uncomfortable, uncompromising, but I have the power. I have the controls. Welcome everybody, Meaningful Jewish Living. I'm just joking. It's all true. Daniel Kraus, excited to be with you, excited to steer this class and to share some wonderful insights into meaningful Jewish living, Jewish life cycles, the engagement and wedding season. Link to tonight's classes, sources is in the chat. Any questions from last week? Any questions about anything related to birth, baby naming for a boy, for a girl, bar, bat mitzvah, anything of the like? Wow, so that could mean that there might be some shyness around answering questions. It could be that you're ready for the quiz and feel confident. Anytime you have a question, feel free to always reach out and ask. We will continue with the next part, which is the engagement season. Okay, so Judaism, Jewish tradition, Jewish custom, and engagements. The Jewish wedding actualizes the most transformational event in a person's life. And prior to the wedding, just letting some more people in. Prior to the wedding, two individuals are completely separate individuals. And after the wedding, they become a married couple with a unified soul and combined goals. And that is incredibly important in any relationship and probably in any religion. But it underscores something exceptionally powerful in Judaism, that we're not just bringing two people together because they love each other, because they have common enjoyment and pleasures, but there's a deep sense, and perhaps we can say also a spiritual sense, that when a Jewish wedding happens and when a husband and wife become united, there's something transformational happening to their souls and they become unified. The groom, the chatan, and the bride, the kala, two Hebrew words, are actually one soul that was split in two before either of them were born. So let's just think about that for a second. The Jewish bride and the Jewish groom were actually one unit, connected, and were split before either of them were born. Why is that important? Because that brings us to the discussion of engagement. What does it mean to be engaged in Judaism? And how does one get engaged in Judaism? Any questions? Any answers? How does one get engaged? Okay, there's not a dating class. And I'm not going to quiz you on your partners if you have, or your love history. But in Judaism, how do you get engaged? Answers in chat, answers in turning on your camera, microphone. How do you get engaged? What do you do?
Matchmaker? Partner?
Okay, a matchmaker. A matchmaker does what?
Sets up two people.
Okay, so a matchmaker could be excellent, a way that you meet each other, but how do you actually pronounce to your fiance that we're engaged in Judaism?
You propose to them?
Right, we propose to them. It might be a trick question, but it's a very simple answer. There is nothing in the Jewish religion that happens at the moment of engagement. Now, there is a traditional custom that used to happen thousands of years ago, which we'll speak about in a minute. But to get engaged to someone is ultimately just you acknowledging to them, and perhaps sometimes more importantly, you telling the rest of the world that you are excited to spend the rest of your life with them and to build a home with them, build a family with them, and be connected to them. That's what the engagement is. So if we say there are two souls that are coming together, beneath the chuppah at the wedding ceremony, according to the Zohar, the primary text of Kabbalah, these two souls, two halves, become a whole again and reunite. And because of the meaning and the momentous of the occasion, the Jewish wedding ceremony and the engagement period, therefore, is filled with many different customs, many different rituals, and is a totally unique experience that will remain with the bride and groom for many years to come. And the customs originate from a rich blend of historical and spiritual underpinnings that represent tradition that has its roots back all the way from Adam and Eve, the national marriage of God and the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, and all the way through to modern day interactions and customs from Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews. The wedding day is not only a day of deep personal joy for the bride and groom, but is also a day of happiness for the whole Jewish people, because a Jewish couple represents the continuity of the Jewish people. And a Jewish couple represents the future of the Jewish people. So it's not just a joyous, momentous experience for the bride and groom and their families and their friends, but actually something bigger for everybody. So we're going to explore tonight what it means to become engaged, and all the customs that go through these various stages of the Jewish wedding ceremony, which is pre, during, and post. We might not cover everything tonight, which means next week will be part 2 of the Jewish wedding ceremony, and then we'll continue with the final part of the Jewish Life Cycle series, which is death and mourning. Sounds a little morbid. It is a little morbid, but it's important for us to understand. Can't paint any fun around that topic. Very important. So most couples date, and there's no prerequisite and predetermined time for how long you date for. And most couples decide at some point that they're going to spend the rest of their life with each other. The concept of a shadchan, which is the word that describes a matchmaker, comes from what idea? Comes from where? And if someone says fiddle on the roof, I'll both appreciate it and also laugh. The concept of a matchmaker means what? It means that someone's profession, someone's role, someone's idea is that there are two people that could work out and could be for each other. There is no special guideline and script and degree to become a matchmaker. And in many ways, we can all become matchmakers if we know and we have single friends who want to get married and might not know one another. But in the very fervently Orthodox circles, where typically the interaction of men and women doesn't really happen like it does in our circles, the concept of a matchmaker has incredible importance, because a marriageable age young man is not going to meet a marriageable age young girl at an event, at a rave, at a local bar, at a restaurant, at the New York Public Library, at the ballet, because that's not what they're interacting. That's not what they're doing, right? So the role of a matchmaker is incredibly important in very Orthodox circles, because they don't interact with the other gender commonly. And it also plays a role in our community, that more of a modern community. And those of you that have taken classes with me before know that I really don't like labels and brands in Judaism. And we'll spend a little bit about time on this later on in Meaningful Jewish Living. But they also play an important role, because people I know might not know you. And if I know you and I know them, and I can think there could be something between the two of you. So we all need to play the role as matchmaker, and that's a very important thing to do. Couple can meet, couple can get engaged on their own, or with the help of a third person matchmaker. There's no need for a matchmaker. But Judaism does teach that every match has an aspect of divine providence. Can everyone have the source sheet? Everyone has access to it? Thumbs up. Okay, great. Thank you. So the first source is taken from Talmud Bavli, from the Babylonian Talmud. We're going to spend an evening later on in the year, Meaningful Jewish Living, where we'll go through all the major Jewish texts and unpack what they are. The Talmud is a text that we use all the time. It is all the a collection of the oral law and the debates of the rabbis that went into creating the framework of Jewish law. The halacha it comes from source of debates in the Talmud, and in the tractate, in the chapter of Sota, on page 2, the Talmud is very eco-friendly. It prints on both sides of the page. So there's always in any page of Talmud, it has a 2a and a 2b, or a 1b and a 1a. It says as follows: Rabbi Yehuda said the name of Rav, 40 days before the fetus is formed, i.e. at the time of conception, a heavenly voice announces the daughter of this man shall be for that man, which is essentially telling us that heaven above proclaims the destiny of each match. And that's a very powerful thought, because that ultimately tells us that in trying to find one's predestined match, one needs to always have signs. Putting the sources again in the chat, everybody should see them and be able to click on the link. You know, in rabbinical school, they don't really tell you how to look at the chat, admit people in the waiting room, figure out the Zoom camera and the microphone and the perfect light. It's all like things you have to figure out in 2020 on your own. So I hope you grade me fairly. In trying to find our match, we need to keep signs and coincidental events in perspective. Because yes, we're always going to have that experience in that story and meet someone randomly and haphazardly. But this notion of a bashert, which is a Yiddish word which means my soulmate, is something which we actually take very seriously. Because if we believe and we acknowledge and we honor the notion that my eternal soulmate is predestined, that's a whole concept to wrap our heads around. But if we understand that for a moment, that there's someone out there that is actually the other half of my soul, then we're going to look for signs of that person, but we're going to know and we're going to feel and we're going to understand what that means. A very famous teacher in Israel, Emunah Braverman, writes this in this article, and I found it very important and very clear to help us understand this concept of a bashert. Because those of us with us tonight that are dating someone, engaged to someone, or looking for a soulmate are all wanting to have clarity on this answer. And she writes as follows. She says, how will I know when he's my bashert, he's my soulmate? How will I know when I'm with the right person? One of my students asked me one day. It doesn't matter, I replied, she says. Make a commitment to him, put all in the hard work and effort necessary, and he'll become your bashert. Bashert is one of the most confusing and misleading ideas in Jewish life. I should have bolded and underlined that. Although the Talmud states that 40 days prior to the formulation of the fetus, a heavenly voice comes down from above and decrees who is meant to be mated with who, this activity in the spiritual realm does not inform us of the practical choice we have to make. In fact, it can be a distraction. It leads us to look for signs and omens in the mysterious way of the cosmos that brought us together and ignore the more important elements required to create a good and productive relationship. The fact that you never go to the store and you're never home from work at the time when he or she was buying exactly the same thing is a cute story, and we can all know experiences of couples that have met like that, and maybe some of us tonight. But it doesn't demonstrate whether he's kind and loyal. The moon, the stars, and the special glow don't speak to whether he or she is honest and trustworthy. All the physical attraction in the world tells us nothing about the staying power of the long haul, or the true understanding of the world commitment. That's why I suggested we need to talk about what a bashert is, and we need to. We only come at the end of the discussion, not the beginning. When the two people build a life together, when they start a foundation of shared values and good character, and if their commitment is strong, then they'll have a healthy and everlasting marriage. With all the hard work and the constant giving to their spouse, they'll create an irrevocable bond through family activities and community, and we'll continue to read on your own. But you see here, the important notion is that although one's spouse may be predestined. It's more important for each of us to search for the necessary elements that create a good marriage, which is kindness, which is loyalty, which is honesty, which is shared values and hard work, than trying to get wrapped into this concept of the experience that will happen to us at a certain time, at a certain place, and feel that magic. I'm not diminishing from the magic and the serendipity, but I'm underscoring that there's something much deeper and more important that we should focus on. For the moment that a couple officially gets engaged, the couple has to decide to build their life together, and they have to acknowledge their engagement through an engagement party. There's no Jewish ritual that happens most commonly in our circles at an engagement party, but usually there's a celebration that can happen. And if you want to have a private celebration, a public celebration, you want to invite the rabbi to say a few words, you want to have here, there, brunch, evening, it doesn't matter, there's nothing Jewish about it. And then you start the process of all the Jewish rituals. Occasionally, you might have experienced that at an engagement party of a very religious couple, they'll do the Tanayim. Tanayim means the engagement conditions. The Tanayim also commonly takes place at the beginning of a wedding ceremony. And it affirms the commitment of the bride and groom and their respective families to marriage. It typically doesn't happen at engagement parties in our circles, but in more religious and certainly in Hasidic circles, in the very Hasidic community, the engagement conditions is signed and executed at their engagements. In our circles, if we do it, go ahead with it. It happens at the beginning of the wedding ceremony. Rabbi Becher, who I encourage everybody to read his books, not because, like me, he's Australian and we grew up with each other, but because he's really a prolific author, has a funny accent, and he's very funny. He has a wonderful book called Gateway to Judaism, and he writes the following. He says, when the families have met and the young couple have decided to marry, the families usually announce the occasion with a small reception known as a vort. It's a Yiddish word. Some families sign a contract, the Tanayim, meaning conditions, that delineates the obligations of each side regarding the wedding and final date of the wedding. Because the contract, which involves financial obligations, is binding, others prefer to delay the Tanayim until the wedding reception. Number one, you do not need a Tanayim. You can skip it. We never really do it, and I certainly didn't do it at my engagement party. We did it at the wedding ceremony, before the wedding, at the pre-wedding ceremony, which we'll talk about. To signal that the Tanayim has been executed. Anyone know what happens? For 5 points. Anyone know? Usually the two mothers, if they are healthy and present at the wedding, will break a plate. Anyone seen that before? Any nodding? Monica's nodding. Okay. So the two mothers come and they break a plate. That is essentially a symbol and a signal that demonstrates the strength of the commitment to the forthcoming wedding. We don't do the engagement conditions now when we get engaged because we don't need to do it. And if we do it and the couple doesn't go ahead with their marriage, which is very common, engagements are broken sometimes, then it's difficult and needs a whole process to undo, so we don't need to do it. You can skip this altogether and you can go straight to the other pre-wedding ceremonies. Any questions? Okay, so the engagement period. The engagement period is intense, and certainly for couples that have got engaged or have had weddings planned in COVID, it adds like an underscore to that intensity that is really, really challenging and puts a lot of stress and pressure on the couple and their families. There's no guidelines that one need to follow when you're engaged, other than all the couples that I'm blessed to work with and officiate at their weddings, and thank God there have been many. Rachel and I always tell them that you need to keep your eye on the prize, because engagements can be really stressful, and there's lots of different realities. And let's just be honest, right? I can stop the recording for this, but just because you and your fiance choose to spend the rest of your life with each other, that doesn't mean your families have to like each other. That doesn't mean your families have to get along. They come from two different worlds, sometimes two different cultures, two different socioeconomic groups. And selfishly, because you love him and he loves you, you bring your families together, and it can be really awkward. And they can fake the whole thing. And you become the receptacle to your parents telling you about his family and his parents and why this and why that. And and you need to close out the noise, because you need to be laser focused on the goal. And the goal is standing under the chuppah together and starting your life together. And this is commonly more true for younger couples, but sometimes even true for older couples. Wedding is not really about the two of you. It's about everyone else. And the more that you can appreciate that reality, you can argue with me, you can fight, you can kick and you scream. It's really about other people. And it's a one celebration that has a lot of planning, a lot of energy, a lot of money that goes into it. But it's keep your eye on the prize. And the prize is a life with each other together. So there's nothing specific about the engagement period. Rabbi Twersky wrote an article. Rabbi Twersky is a psychiatrist and a rabbi, and is an unbelievable contributor of Jewish teachings in today's time. He has a very successful clinic that is renowned for drug addiction in Pittsburgh, and he now lives in New Jersey. He writes as follows, bottom of page 2. The following is Rabbi Twersky's response to a case where information was withheld and subsequently revealed during the marriage. And I bring this, I'll tell you why I put this here. Numerous times I've stated my view and pleaded with parents and people involved in shidduch not to withhold important information. A healthy marriage is based on mutual trust, and failure to reveal information undermines this trust. I can express a halachic opinion, a Jewish opinion. There are cases where failure to reveal information can be grounds for invalid procedure. One may ask for annulment, but this may be discussed with a Jewish legal authority. And I say this because it's really important, specifically medically and psychologically, and all personal information be revealed before the engagement. And we live in a time where people think they know everything about everyone else because it's all on social media. Well, it's not always on social media. And I encourage everybody to really make sure, wherever you are in whatever relationship stage you're in, that you know what this means. And we can talk offline at any point, but you need to know exactly what the person you're choosing to spend the rest of your life with and know everything about them. Once engaged, you start to plan for the wedding. Weddings need a minimum and a maximum of how many people? Anybody know? Jewish wedding. Thank you. 10 people, which is a magic number in Judaism. It's a quorum. It's a minyan. That is the number that is needed to have a Jewish wedding celebration. That can include the rabbi and the witnesses. We'll talk about that. But you can't get married with 3 people and 4 people. You need 10 people, 10 to witness and to be present at the wedding. You can get married wherever you want, destination weddings, local weddings, rooftop weddings, beach weddings, wherever. This day, 7 years ago, I was in Mexico for a wedding, and I've traveled globally for weddings, and they're all beautiful, as are the weddings that I do in Manhattan and around the tri-state area. It's about the people who are there and the energy that's in the room. Doesn't matter where you are. But all of the next set of ceremonies and rituals and customs are all pre-wedding. So a lot of preparation goes into the wedding. A lot of preparation goes into the planning of the evening and the flowers and the music and the menu. But let's focus, that's all important, and I'm happy to share all my opinions on all of that. And I'm very good with color coordination and setting your music. But let's focus on the Jewish piece. So firstly, when it comes to wedding preparation, the bride and groom need to go through a set of classes and prepare for what it means to run a Jewish home. Right? There are lots of books you can buy on this, but it's very important that the officiant, the rabbi, together with a female educator, and I'll explain why in a moment, prepare the couple for what it means to run a Jewish home, what it means to make Judaism a priority in your home, what it means to have a harmonious, active relationship where you can share and talk, what it means to focus on Jewish values, how you choose a Jewish community, and make sure you discuss some of the big ticket items, like are you both willing to entertain Hebrew school, day school, circumcision for children, and not leave these topics out until they're relevant, only when that comes up. And also that you understand what the wedding ceremony consists of. A lot of the rituals that we have seen before wedding ceremonies are actually custom. And there's lots of, I don't know if any of you have been to Jewish weddings, I'm sure some of you have. The bride circles the groom and the glass breaks and this and that. A lot of this stuff is custom. And I always tell couples that my role is to make sure that it's a traditional Jewish wedding ceremony, but to really plug and play and to make the most meaningful event for you and your spouse. So you need to understand the rituals, the reasons behind everything, and then work together to make sure it's exactly as you have ever wanted it and imagined it. The offer of celebration is the first pre-celebration that happens. It's a Yiddish word. A lot of words related to the wedding ceremonies and a lot of Jewish customs come from the Yiddish language. Anybody know why? No? Where is the language of Yiddish spoken?
Europe, Eastern Europe.
In which part of Eastern Europe?
Like Poland, Russia.
Nowadays, anyone speak Yiddish?
A little bit.
A little bit. So I've been to Belarus, I've been to Latvia, I've been to Russia. They don't speak Yiddish there at all, trust me. Yiddish is a dialect that stems primarily, as Jonathan said, from German. And I always say Yiddish is like Yinglish. It's like Jewish German that was spoken in the shtetl in Europe. And Jews wanted to have a language which was both sounding similar to German, but also a dialect and a language for themselves. And there's a whole study and analysis of the Yiddish language, and it's a very important part of Jewish culture in the Ashkenazic circles, certainly those that come from Europe. Yiddish is still the language that is spoken by a lot of Hasidic Jews. And if we just cross over the bridge, maybe some of you even over that bridge now, in Brooklyn and Williamsburg and any parts there, the Hasidic community still speak Yiddish and they hold it sacred, part of the safeguarding they have for their tradition. I don't speak much Yiddish. My grandmother and my father are fluent in Yiddish, and they speak Yiddish to each other. And I can pick up and understand a little bit. But the languages, the words that we have a lot of these wedding ceremonies from are all Yiddish words. And the Afrof is the Shabbat before the wedding, typically, doesn't have to be the one before the wedding. And it's a custom for the groom to go to synagogue and to be called up to the Torah. And the word Afrof literally means calling up. And it's usually accompanied by a kiddush, a celebration afterwards, and a festive meal, and the family can come. And it's usually done the week before the wedding. Now, the week before the wedding can have different determinations, because if you get married on a Sunday, is the Saturday the day before the week before, or is the whole week prior? We'll put that to the side and come back to it in a moment. And have a look at page 3, top source. On the Shabbat before the wedding, there's an increased atmosphere of joy in honor of the groom. The bride and the groom wear their new clothes they purchased for the wedding. Some of this is called Shabbat Afrof. The Shabbat morning, the groom is escorted to the synagogue, accompanied by song and praise. These are beautiful customs which happen in the shtetl, don't happen nowadays in the same way. But the groom has a call up to the Torah. Why is the Afrof meaningful for the groom? And by extension, why is it meaningful for the bride? Where does it come from? So it actually traces its origin from the temple. And when King Solomon built the temple, and he saw the need to practice extra kindness to God, he built 2 extra gates, one for grooms and one for mourners. And those walking to the temple on Shabbat would sit between the gates. And when a groom would enter the gate of the groom, they'd call him and may the Holy One dwells, and they'd have a special sort of call to him. When a mourner entered, they say a special sentence as well. And it would enable those sitting nearby on the outside of the temple to give a level of encouragement to the bride, to the groom, and also support and encouragement to the mourner. And this custom was transferred to the synagogue and study halls after the temple was dismissed and destroyed. And that's really where the custom comes from. So you could ask, what's the connection between a groom and a mourner? And why should there be a sort of connection on this age-old custom? It's a whole long analysis we could do, but it's one of the customs that we stem from the temple. A bride and groom in Jewish wedding do not need to have an offerof. It is a custom, but many couples enjoy it, and it's very much part of their pre-wedding celebration. Next questions. So to recap, an engagement represents two halves coming back together, two souls coming back together as one. On the wedding day, under the chuppah, the Jewish neshamot of the bride and groom unite and sync and become whole again. Although one spouse, we said, is predestined from birth, rather than looking for, I guess, circumstantial evidence to prove this, it's more important that we focus on necessary elements that create a good marriage and a good home, which is kindness and love and harmony and shared values. There's no prescript to an engagement ceremony. It can happen any way we want. There is a custom to do the engagement condition, as we said, called the Tanayim, which we can do at our engagement ceremonies, but most likely it will happen at the wedding if we choose. And we said the Shabbat before the wedding is called the Ofruf, when the groom is called to the Torah, and family and friends come and there's a celebration. Pause, breathe, inhale. Questions? Nothing? Am I muted? Can you hear me? No questions. You guys want to get to my wedding video, don't you? I can't show it to you tonight. Maybe next week. Maybe a picture. No, okay, let's go. Okay, the wedding day. The wedding day, as I said earlier, is the most important, transformational, joyous, and holiest day of one's life. And it's a day in which a person gains a certain level of spiritual completion and takes ultimately what we say is a giant stride towards fulfilling their fundamental purpose in life. And we've said before, and we'll always say that everyone has a unique goal in life. Every single soul, according to Judaism, has a specific purpose, a specific goal. And when you figure out what that is, great. A bride and groom are well advised they should take the most of this wedding day. It's a very serious day. A bride and groom in Judaism are considered like a king and a queen, and we'll see some customs around that as well. But let me ask a question. Why is the wedding ceremony important? A little bit before, maybe like 6 minutes ago, I kind of dismissed the wedding because I said it can be challenging. And couples can often agree and disagree in the engagement period, and it can be very challenging for families to go through. And hello, it's 2020. You can file taxes without being married to your partner. You can have children without being married to your partner. So why do we provide such a value and such an importance around this concept of getting married? What's the benefit? Why do I need to do it? Why can't I just live with him or her, have children, file taxes, get all the benefits? Why go through the process? What's the importance? So that's a question you need to join in front of the eyes of God. Okay, could be. Thank you for the suggestion. It's tradition. It's got to be a little bit deeper than that. And I appreciate the answers, but there's got to be something more than that. Why starting a Jewish family? I can start a Jewish family without getting married. Can I not? Not giving you any ideas, Hal. I'm just saying you can do it if you wanted to.
Maybe something around doing it in the eyes of God, I guess.
So take that a little bit further. What does that mean?
So I guess formally acknowledging it in religious terms.
This is pomegranate blueberry. It's an amazing flavor. Aha Seltzer. I don't work for them. I don't get any royalties, but I do enjoy them. In case anyone's wondering what I'm drinking. Someone texted me one week and said, "What beer are you drinking?" I'm like, no beer. I might be Australian, but there's no beer being consumed during class. Okay, tradition, God. Any other reasons? So there's a certain reason we need to think about. And we need to seriously ask ourselves this question of why we are going through the process and why Judaism places such a value on the notion of marriage. So it's a mitzvah, that's certainly true. So in the creation of man, we're taught something very simple and very clear. In the story of Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, Vayivra Elokim et Adam betzalmo, that man created God in his image, B'tzelem Elokim bara oto, zachar nekeva bara otam, that everyone is created in the image of God. And the verse appears here to contradict itself, because if you look at it and try and just look on face value, it says first it states that God created one human, but then it refers to two, male and female. And as we see in a moment from the next source, the original human being was what we called an androgynous, a unity of both a male and a female. And only later was there a division of the male and female halves. And have a look at chapter 2:18. God said, it's not good for man to be alone. I'll make for him a compatible helper, i.e. one opposite him, Ezer Kenegdo. And Ramban, the Jewish philosopher and teacher and commentator Nachmanides, writes as follows. Bottom of page 3. It's not good for man to be alone. Originally, they were created as one being with two faces. And in a sense, man was alone and there was no one separate from him. But God saw that it would be better if one partner would stand opposite the other so they could both see each other and they could be apart or together as they wish. This is the meaning of the continuation of the verse, God will make for him a compatible helper. Husband and wife are two halves of a whole. And continuing this source in an online magazine known as Tradition Journal, source number 3, bottom of page 3, Rabbi Stopler writes the following. He says, the biblical view of marriage is unique among the many extant religions, philosophical and sociological views. The Bible sees a married couple neither as two people who have made a contractual agreement, nor as two individuals who have entered into a lasting loving partnership, but as two halves of a whole, each of whom finds his or her missing half and thus reconstitutes a wholeness by recreating a pre-existent independent entity. The Bible's married couple is higher than the most harmonious, romantic, united in love we. It represents the new I in recognition of God's creation of man and woman, not as a complementary halves of unit known as the family, but as two halves of a single persona. Persona which, even before birth, was designated as a whole personality, and in which in marriage transcends its temporary postnatal bifurcation, each side which finds each other's half, thus created the dual reconstituted personality. The complete human being includes both the male and female components as God originally created Adam. Two halves of a whole is more than just we, but rather a new I. It's a very powerful idea, a very important idea. And one of the reasons why we drive such a primary fundamental importance around finding a spouse and getting married. A great rabbi who lived in Jerusalem, known as Rabbi Ari Levine, lived at the creation of the state in the 1940s in Jerusalem. His grandson, Benji Levine, is one of my favorite tour guides in Jerusalem. Very charismatic, animated, and he brings you to all the locations where his grandfather was a tremendous righteous individual who was known as the righteous elder of Jerusalem. And in the 1940s, if you know any history of the state of Israel, it was controlled by what government? British Empire. And they imprisoned all the Jews who were trying to help create the state. And Rabbi Levine would visit them in prison, and he would just do tremendous, tremendous things. And one of his students was of marriageable age and was about to embark on the sea of matrimony. And he came to his rabbi and said, I want some guidance. How should I behave towards my wife? And how should I treat her? And the rabbi looked at him in deep wonder. And he said, how can you ask a question like that? He said, a wife is like your own. You treat her as you treat yourself. And indeed, when his own wife, Hannah, felt in pain, he went with her to the doctor and he told the doctor, my wife's foot is hurting us. And it's such a simple idea, but it's a powerful, powerful idea. And there are many stories of him saying, like, how are you feeling? We are feeling hungry. Can we have dinner now? And go to the doctor and to say that my wife's foot is hurting us is such a beautiful concept of the teaching that we just taught, of the unity and the creation of a new cycle of a new whole. The question was asked and is important about same-sex couples and marriage. And I want to take this question and I want to hold it for next week, because it takes more time than I want to take us off course right now in terms of the wedding process. But it's a very important question, and how Judaism approaches and incorporates those relationships that are of the same gender. And we need to address that, understand that. And certainly in today's times, where it's a lot more prevalent than it ever was in society at large, what does that mean for us as traditional Jews? And we'll pick that up next week. I want to just stay on my train of thought, but I appreciate that question. I'm glad that it was raised. If you look at the top of page 4, there are 2 quotes from Genesis that to me underscore a very important fundamental element of what we're talking about. And it's chapter 2, verse 24 of Genesis. And I want to have a little bit of a text study with each of you. So be prepared to use the chat feature or unmute yourself. And the sentence says as follows, therefore shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. So what are the key words in this sentence? In beginning this process of marriage, there are some secret fundamental teachings in this sentence. Not so many words. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. What would you say the secrets here? Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and cleave unto his wife. Some of the most fundamental principles of a healthy marriage are in this sentence. I took a course 6 years ago with some of the preeminent marriage counselors in the country. John Gottman, anyone who's heard of John Gottman? He does a tremendous amount of counseling and teaching, and I took a certificate course with him in marriage guidance and counseling. He can predict if a couple will get divorced after spending 35 minutes with them, to a very scary statistic of success rate. And he's had thousands of couples in a studio where he records them, and he makes predictions that will blow your mind because they're all accurate. But back to this sentence, why is it so important?
There's like an element of kind of reshifting your priorities, like
Beautiful.
leaving and then cleaving.
Beautiful. So I think the word cleave is tremendously important here, and it was mentioned to me in the chat as well. Leaving your father and your mother's home is both a physical act, but is importantly also a mental, emotional, psychological act as well. We can sometimes bring our childhood experiences and our childhood baggage into our marriage and into our relationships. And when we get married, and sometimes if we're getting married, it's not the first time we're living with our spouse. We could have lived with them for 3 or 4 years, 10 years. We could have lived with many other partners. But it's something very different when you become husband and wife. And you need to leave your father and mother's home, not just physically. You can live with them if you want, but it's probably not advised. Maybe in a pandemic reality for a little bit, that's acceptable, but not long term. And if you are living with them, talk to me afterwards. But you need to leave their emotional experiences. Take all the good that you had in your upbringing. Take all the positive and take all the challenge and things that you didn't appreciate about your parents' experience and the parenting that they did with you, and perhaps that you swore or you would never do to your own children or your own spouse. And take the good and take the bad, but then cleave together. And I think this sentence can be unpacked in so many ways, but it's so important. And why are we doing all this? Because we go look at chapter 1, verse 28, because we're told to the concept of completion and perfection, which is the primary objective of marriage, is procreation. And marriage in itself is regarded as a mitzvah, but it's a necessary ingredient and completion as a human being. And you look here, and the source states and clearly that it's so that we can fulfill the obligation and the wonderful experience of being blessed with being parents. And a question we could ask and take us on a whole tangent off topic is, what does it mean, and how do you fulfill this commandment of this mitzvah? And I do not like the word commandment as a translation for mitzvah, but it's the common one that's used. How do I fulfill this? That's a whole nother discussion. But that's an important element here to understand. That their purpose of a sacred union is, yes, so you find your spouse and you complete that whole, so that you can fulfill this commandment, this mitzvah of pru uravu, which is filling the world, and procreation. There's some other sources here you can look at from the Gemara, from the Talmud, and we're going to look at the wedding day outline. Any questions? Why is procreation such a fundamental course of marriage in part? So without marriage and children, there'd be no people to settle the world, and there'd be no one to carry out the purpose of creation. And the purpose of creation, the reason that we're here, is to fulfill the observance of all the mitzvot. So if we're not here, we can't do that, and we can't fill the world with goodness. And we can't do that if we don't create another generation and future progeny. So it's all interlinked. And perhaps we can say this is why marriage is seen as such an important mitzvah, and maybe it's indispensable to Judaism, because it's how the world continues. And therefore, marriage is a vital, holy institution within Judaism for human completion, for perfection, and also as a means to draw closer to the Almighty, to be able to fulfill His commandments and His creations. And we'll talk a bit more about this next week, because clearly there'll be wedding part 2, given the time. But that's why the very name of the wedding ceremony in Hebrew is called Kiddushin. And Kiddushin is the same word that we use on Friday night. We make Kiddush, we sanctify the wine, and Kadosh means holy. All have the same Hebrew root word. Just as one can sanctify time through observance of Shabbat, when we pause and we stop and we honor that there's a day when we want to be like God and rest, and that's the notion of Shabbat, and the creation of a holy space. We can also sanctify our relationships by going through this concept of marriage. Bottom of page 4, there's a 5-step process to the wedding day outline. And we'll just look at them and then we'll conclude for the evening. The first section is called the Kabbalat Panim. Kabbalah is the same word we use for the Friday night prayer service, which is the Kabbalat Shabbat. It means to receive. Just like we receive Friday night through the recitation of the Kabbalat Shabbat prayers, the guests are received by the bride and groom, and Panim is faces. So you greet the bride and groom when you arrive at the wedding. The Badekin, another Yiddish word, which means the veiling of the bride, an important pre-step to the wedding ceremony. The wedding ceremony itself, which is typically taking place under a chuppah, under a wedding canopy. After the wedding canopy experience, which can be as quick as, 10 minutes, typically around 20 minutes, can be as long as 40 minutes, I hope not longer. After all the steps happen under the chuppah, the couple goes into seclusion, Hebrew word being yichud. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Echad is oneness, yichud is seclusion. It's an important step. Happens immediately following the ceremony. And then the wedding meal is, of course, it's a Jewish thing because Jews love to eat and love to celebrate and love to dance. But the wedding meal is actually part of the wedding ceremony itself, because we learn, and we'll discuss next week, that you need to celebrate. And there's no requirement to have a tremendously elegant sushi bar and spread of carving stations and whatever you think you've seen at weddings and beyond. But you do need to have a simple wedding celebration, a simple meal. So they're the 5 steps which we'll go into next week, as I dig up some 15-year-old footage from our wedding, and Rachel will join us, and we'll go through the Jewish wedding ceremony itself. Let's pause at 5 minutes to 8 and ask for any questions, clarifications about what we just studied tonight, or about the course, or about anything else. Remind everybody that at 8:45, which is in 50 minutes, we'll meet for pre-Shabbat inspiration. Please join us. Feel free to do whatever you need to do in between. Grab a drink, clean the house. The videos are posted online on the website. We're in the middle of rebuilding the virtual website, so we haven't posted a link to where the videos will be, but I can send them out individually if you want. Just let me know. I'll send you a recording. If you don't get our emails weekly, I'm sorry, and I feel bad for you. Email me, and you can get them. Email announcements come out every Thursday. We also have a WhatsApp group that is only for upcoming announcements and information. So I hope you are on the WhatsApp group as well. We have in-person Shabbat services this week, and hope everyone can join if they're able to. And if you're not currently fluent in Hebrew, then I encourage you to join Sarah Rosen for exploration of Hebrew. She has 2 classes. She's a master, and she will teach you how to speak Hebrew in just a short few weeks. Any questions? I'm still concerned there's been no questions since we started. Anyone have a joke? No. Okay, Shabbat Inspiration back on Zoom at 8:45. Thank you all for coming. And I look forward to seeing you all at 8:45. If you're looking for all the class information, ckj.org is where all the information lives. Actually, can I do what I'm trying to do? 1 second. All the class information is online. Please check it out. Have a great night. Thanks for coming. And if I don't see you 8:45, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.